iDAKTO is a 2-year-old company with the objective of providing sovereign, secure, and simple to use ID to governments, so issuers, citizens or consumers, hence users, and service providers. Um, Today, I'm going to try and discuss how what does the eKYC field look like today. We're moving away from, or we're still doing, sorry, physical KYC, but the whole KYC business has to move online to be able to verify the identities and do everything we're trying to do online. So here's the battle reports. So the first one, first thing, just on the physical side, where are we today? Today it's a bit the illusion of Christmas, I called it. Many people will tell you a lot of ID documents have turned into Christmas trees. They're very nice documents, sometimes with 60 or plus security features. But most of these security features, first of all, protect the blank document. They don't protect the actual variable data, which is the important part that we want to check. And then, second of all, most people don't know what the securities are. An average person, I think, remembers about 3 security features at most. And so in the end, most of these documents can only really be checked by experts. Now, this type of issue becomes even more complicated when you get to the digital world. Everything scales up. So I found some surveys in the financial sector. They report fraud rates that are 8 times higher in digital than on the branch side. And also, because of that, they also tend to decline a lot more customers than they do in the real world. Now, where does that do to the financial sector in particular? We'll ignore the payment fraud today, but that's less than 50% of the issues. Many of the issues are the account opening, and that's where a lot of people concentrate on the KYC. That's actually only 12% of the fraud. And then you have 46% of the fraud is account takeover fraud, where you fail to not identify your user, but actually authenticate them. We have to remember that in the past years, we've had a lot of data breaches, more and more and more. So we're kind of facing I called it a zombie-apocalypse. All this data is coming back to haunt us and attack us. And so today, it's very important to have proper liveness detection to see what you have or what you are. You can't just ask what you know, what your birthday is, what your mother's maiden name was. So if we look at the KYC battlefield, we have I identified three areas of battle. The first one is previous issuances, the ones that don't depend on us, but that will generate what will be breeder documents for our credential issuance. The second one is the identification part, and the third one is the authentication part. And of course, all this allows an issuance that will then feed back into other identity creations, credential creations. So on the issuances, what are we attacked on? The big fake is the intellectual fake. And that's actually the worst. People just walk into, I don't know, a city hall, request a real ID. The person doesn't check correctly. There's actually no background checks after, and the person gets a real ID document. Well, basically, if that happens, we're stuck. We can't do anything. The person has a real document with their picture on it and whatever name they asked for. We'll kind of ignore this one for now. Then we have the falsifications, which is somebody takes an ID document, transforms it to put their picture on it, and the counterfeiting, where they will create a document from scratch, and then the fantasy docs. And don't laugh. There are some security experts here, or fraud experts. They'll tell you that actually a lot of these documents do get through. And so the last step is authentication. On authentication, we used to have the lookalikes, and I added the data breaches, all the passwords that have leaked. Those are causing a lot of fraudulent attempts. Now, how do we defend ourselves? So traditionally, we have 3 lines of defense. The first line is being able to check something on your own. The second line is using tools, and the third line is relying on experts. So the first line has completely disappeared. Breeder docs, anybody can fake a breeder doc, usually your electricity bill or whatever. That's just gone. So we have to rely on the second line, where we set up usually QR codes, visible digital seals, VDS, on the documents to be able to ensure the origin of these electrical bills or these paper documents. And then, of course, the only thing we can do is run cross-checks in the background. On the identification side, we have all the shiny things. Most people see the shiny things on your ID card and say, oh, it's shiny, it must be a real card. So basically, it's useless. And it's counterproductive, because instead of looking at what matters, people look at the shiny things. We have a second line with electronic seals on QR codes in a chip. But in most cases, we don't use it. In a vast majority of cases, we just don't use it. And for the eKYC, we're relying on physical security features and experts. We'll see later that it's actually entirely done with experts today. Finally, authentication. We have, for the authentication, we have the how do we fight lookalikes? Well, first of all, we have the biometrics tools. Well, we used to have the birthday and pet's name, but of course, I mentioned those are useless now. You have the biometrics, and then you have what you have. So smart cards, FIDO tokens, OTP, push notifications, what you know, PIN, sometimes a password if it hasn't been compromised. And then what you do. We're starting to see more and more behavioral. So that's helping out. Then you have to remember that the frauders are getting a lot of help now with new technology. They're getting deep fakes. They're getting more and more data breaches as reinforcements. On our side, we're trying to use AI. We're trying to use machine learning. But the fact is, it's quite difficult to use machine learning and AI when you're on the light side of the force. You have a need for a lot of documents to be able to do your machine learning, and of course, it's quite impossible to have a large library of real documents to be able to train your AI. So in most cases today, the AI is used for document identification. So to be able to easily identify what type of document it is. To maybe do OCR, you'll check the viz and the MRZ, and you'll make sure that they're coherent. And that's actually a good approach. That's probably one of the better approaches to using AI. You can also try to identify where visual security features are. You can try to identify whether the document is live and whether the user is live. So those are kind of useful, but in the end, you still need to have a check, because what happens, I'm sorry to point this out, but it's last week's news. You see the ID.me issue, where a lot of people had to use ID.me to get access to their government services in the US, and the service just didn't scale, in my opinion. A lot of people got stuck, couldn't get through the AI checks. There was no good support that they could reach. And in the end, these people spent months trying to get access to their government services. Now, what we see globally, I think in the eKYC field, is that eKYC is retreating to the third line with manual operators verifying everything by video with the help of AI. So AI is doing a good job helping them out, but you still need to have these operators verifying everything. And this is actually being put into, this is becoming mandatory. In France, for example, you have the PVID, which basically mandates you have a manual operator somewhere in Europe because of privacy constraints and GDPR that visually checks all your elements. So you have privacy constraints, you have cost constraints because you have to pay all these operators. You have scalability constraints. So look at the ID.me issue. I think that's quite possibly a big scalability issue. And then you have the entire UX and issue with response time. Why? Because when you do this, you're not on a synchronous verification, you're asynchronous. So sometimes you have to wait 2 hours for the check to come through. And in terms of UX, what do you have to do? You have to tell the user to do a little dance in front of his mobile phone, usually. He has to move his head up, move his head down, turn his passport around, turn it left, turn it right. It's quite cumbersome for most of them. So what we propose is to retake the second line with an undefeated champ that's actually on the field today and that we're not using. We have to move to an NFC first approach. If a document has NFC, you should rely on NFC. Why? Most users have NFC in their phones. Most users are used to using contactless today. So if you use NFC, you'll get automated synchronous verification. You'll get guaranteed quality, integrity, and origin of data. And that form factor is reusable for liveness, for consent, and generally for MFA. So the whole issue that we had at the beginning with not only onboarding customers, but also account takeovers can be thwarted using MFA and using NFC. Now, last but not least, the level of security for this is quite high because users have their data with them in their pocket. It's not SSI, but it's decentralized identity. So a little bit about how we propose to do this. We have the IDCluster platform. It's an IAM platform. It's purpose-built from the ground up for national ID programs and for privacy. So we have 4 pillars: security by design, privacy by design, UX design, and also it's cloud native. So it can scale to whatever size program that you want, where most solutions were in the IAM field were designed for corporate use. It can support any document, any authentication factor we can plug in. It supports both centralized and with traditional PKI and decentralized solutions with a distributed ledger infrastructure. It's easy to integrate using OpenID, and it can support any type of hosting. Then after that, the use cases are, I would say, limited, but let's start with the big ones: eKYC, MFA, SSO, e-signature, fast onboarding, where you have basically form filling. All of those become possible with such a platform.